Hello guys, in this part of tutorial we want to look at how we can use PHP and MySQL to handle logging in. So this is a situation where the user is presented with an email address and password field or any authentication mechanism that you want to use, maybe username and password, and once they submit the correct values it's compared with what exists in the database, and then they are redirected to the correct page upon successful logging in. Otherwise, they are denied the opportunity to access the system. Now, for us to do that, we will learn about, or we need to use the session. So we may need to check about what's sessions in PHP. It's just a way of keeping track of a particular user from the point of which they log into the system to the time they log out. We will also use MySQL numRows. I think this one you've not used it. So MySQL numRows functions, those two are the key highlights for today's recording. Now, to begin, of course, I've preloaded the form. This is easy stuff compared to, or rather, based on what we learned in the previous tutorial. So we have the code to create the form here. Then we have database connectivity. Then we have posted the form values, at least for that. So the next thing we want to do is to do a select statement so that we can compare whatever the user has posted with what exists into the database. So we can use SQL select, MySQL query, connect select all from users, and then we use the where clause, where email address, whatever the user has posted, equals to the table, the email address in the table, for instance, this here, or let's use this is unique, equals to whatever the user has posted, and password equals to whatever the user has posted. So it's an issue of comparing what exists in the database and the two values that the user has provided us from the form. So we can check how many rows this returns. So if we have password combinations, the same username and the same password repeated in the database, and it's going to return more than one item, that's a bad way of implementing a login system. It should not allow for an email password combination to be the same. So we are going to create a variable, call it number of rows, and in our number of rows we are going to pass in MySQL numRows, and we give it this variable. So let's echo this and see how many number of rows we have. Number of rows, this should give us what? It should return 1. So we can use this email address, trial@gmail, and the password is trial1. So we have 1 here. Suppose I was to edit this code so that we only check for email address, you'll notice that I have a repeated email address here. So this should give us 2. This should give us 2. So if I was to put that, just put anything because the password is not being tested, submit, we have 2. So we want to ensure that when we have only one item, that's when we can now query the items, or rather load the values that are in that row, or in that row. So we want to know, we want to get the email address, we want to get the user ID and the password. Those are the key items. We may actually pull all the records, all the items. So anyway, for the logging in, let's get user. User ID equals to, no, we don't call it that way, we use a while loop. So while, and row equals to MySQL fetch MySQL fetch array, then we want this. Okay, then we can say user ID equals to row user ID. So generally, let's see if we're able to get this user ID. Can we try to echo user ID? Let's see if we get the correct user ID. I'm going to use this. Let's see if we're gonna get 4 as the output. So in this case, we want to try that, and the password was trial 123. Submit. Undefined variable user ID. Let's get back there. Okay, user ID was 2 user ID. Oh, it's outside. Let's put it inside the echo statement. Trial at Gmail. Then trial 1. Submit. Yes, we have the right thing. So we have gotten the ID. Yeah, so from here we can track this person whichever page he accesses, because we already gotten the ID. So we introduce now the concept of sessions. So we want to use that tracker. So one important thing to note is that any form that has session must have session start function at the start of the form. That's why I've moved it at the very start. It should be the first thing. So I'll just write session and start, so that by the time this file is loaded, the first thing that is loaded is session start. So now once we have session start there, we get inside our code and we add the session. So we're going to use session, and then we say session ID equals to, so we assign it to this value so that that becomes our session ID. We put it there, and from there you can now redirect the user because you have already gotten this user ID and put it as a session ID. So we now want to redirect the user, so we're going to use header, and we pass in location. We want to take them to homepage.php. That page does not exist anyway. So you can go ahead and create this page so that to control new. Then save these as homepage.php. Inside here, let's just test if the session variable is being passed. So here we can say, let's start with the session start. Okay. Then we can say, we can create a variable here called ID. We can say equals to, we want to pass in this value. So we bring it there. Okay, so let's see if the user is redirected to home page. Are we able to echo the name of the user? Not the name of the user, but the ID of the user. Will we be able to track that ID from login through to home page? So that's echo ID. So hopefully we will get there. So trial at gmail.com, then trial 1, submit. Okay, so that was successful. We have home page, then we have ID. Now from here you can do virtually anything. Instead of actually just echoing ID, why don't we welcome this user, hello so and so. So from here, let's grab the database connectivity because that's important. Can get this and move it to our home page. And once we have the database connectivity, we can run the SQL statement, but now use this ID. So MySQL connect select all from user, where user ID, this field here, equals to ID. And once we have that, I believe now we can welcome this user by telling him welcome so and so. So now that we have managed to set up these, we have the user ID, the value that was passed from the previous form, that is a login form, to home page. We want to use that to query our user table and be able to pull the first name and last name of this particular user upon logging in, so that instead of just showing number 4, we can display something like welcome, first name and last name. There we go. So let's test how this works. So I've used the while loop, and then I've passed in the I've created a variable first name and last name and passed in the values fn and ln from our table here. So we can try these. There was one that had, let's use this, test 1 2 3. Okay, so we are good. Welcome. So for those who've used encryption, it would be important for us to encrypt the value of the password at this point, so that the password or rather at this point before selection. So maybe you can pass this to SHA-1 and then it is encrypted to compare with the encrypted password. Okay. Thank you very much. I won't stop the video at that point.